I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his famous I Have a Dream speech at the March on Washington on August 28, 1963. This speech had a lasting effect on America and the entire world on the topic of civil rights. Behind the scenes, a man who got very little credit at the time worked tirelessly to make the march happen, helping Dr. King to break racial barriers with peaceful protest. That man was Bayard Rustin. Bayard Rustin was born on March 17, 1912 in Westchester, Pennsylvania, into a Quaker household. Walter Neagle, Rustin's partner later in life, said this regarding Rustin's beliefs in a letter to us.
Mr. Rustin's beliefs and activism were rooted in his Quaker faith. Quakers believe in the oneness of the human family, in human equality, in nonviolent resolution of conflict, and speaking truthfully.
Raised by his grandparents, Rustin grew up with the impression that violence was never an answer, which led him down the path of pacifism. Rustin attended Wilberforce College after working very hard in high school to achieve good grades, excel in music, and become a top-notch athlete within his school. In college, Rustin became more and more aware of the injustice against African Americans. Rustin's career as a civil rights activist was born through the pain and suffering of his brothers and sisters, his fellow African Americans. He joined the Young Communist League in protest of segregation and in favor of equality for everyone. However, the League seemed to abandon the fight for African American rights, so in 1941, Rustin left the organization. Afterwards, Rustin's career took off as he became more active in the civil rights movement. Rustin attended the first World Pacifist Peace Conference in India in the hopes of meeting Gandhi, who had so greatly inspired him in person. Unfortunately, Rustin arrived in India too late, for Gandhi had just been assassinated. Instead, he spent time with Gandhi's sons in the hopes of finding out how he was as a man. This trip was a high point in Rustin's life, a point in time where he solidified his beliefs and discovered what he was meant to do. However, this blissful time did not last long. After leaving the Communist League, Rustin joined the Fellowship of Reconciliation, which is, as the official website states, an interfaith peace fellowship leading the charge on today's most pressing human and civil rights issues. The FOR was happy to have him, up until an untimely occurrence. Rustin was arrested for what was known at the time as sexual perversion. He was caught having sex with a man in a car. The fact that Rustin was gay could end a life and career at that time. It was situations like these, as well as his communist past, that pushed Rustin into the background of the civil rights movement. But he never gave up his hope of playing a role in breaking racial barriers. In time, he would realize that there were other barriers that needed to be broken as well. In 1955, Rustin traveled to Alabama under the suggestion of A. Philip Randolph, a civil rights organizer, to meet a man named Dr. Martin Luther King. When Rustin arrived at King's residence, his home was filled with weapons, guns for protection. Rustin explained the complications of having such weapons in King's home when Dr. King believed in peaceful protest and pacifism. Rustin changed the way King looked at the world and how he would ultimately continue his career. This was during the Montgomery bus boycott. These famed 15 days were pivotal in the civil rights movement as the movement gained strength and power in the fight to break racial barriers. Montgomery bus boycotts were 15 days that changed history as African Americans such as Rosa Parks, Dr. Martin Luther King, and Bayard Rustin refused to ride Alabama buses until they were desegregated, and whites and blacks could ride freely together. After an experience on one of the buses where a woman held her child back and called Rustin a racial slur, he said,
"It occurred to me shortly after that it was an absolute necessity for me to declare homosexuality, because if I didn't, I was a part of the prejudice. I was aiding and abetting the prejudice that was a part of the effort to destroy me."
Dr. King and Rustin celebrated their first success as a team and continued to work together in the civil rights struggle. They faced a new barrier as the March on Washington neared. King and Rustin were accused of being together as a gay couple by a Democratic black congressman, Adam C. Powell, who opposed the march. Powell sent a messenger to threaten King, telling him if they continued with the march, he would accuse King of having an affair with Rustin, which would discredit the march and also possibly deal a fatal blow to the movement as a whole. This threat hurt the pair's relationship and their work as a whole. Rustin said this regarding this situation in an interview later in life.
At a given point, there was so much pressure on Dr. King about my being gay, and particularly because I would not deny it, that he set up a committee to explore whether it would be dangerous for me to continue working with him.
But the March on Washington would propel both men towards one of their greatest successes.
Well, Mr. Randolph asked me if I would set up the logistics for the march, which I immediately began to do. And those logistics were to create a 200,000 people. We really got 250,000. And to get every agency in America, Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, intellectuals, labor movement, everybody involved, and to contain it so it was intensely nonviolent. And so I set up the plans for the march, and Mr. Randolph gave me the right, along with Roy Wilkins and the other civil rights leaders, to see that that march was carried out.
Crowds began to file into the front of the Lincoln Memorial Building to witness history in action. Fears were diminished when well over double of what they were hoping for gathered in the heart of the Capitol for this protest. The itinerary for the day was clear. It was listening. A lot of listening. Many things were said and many promises were made, but the centerpiece of the event was Dr. Martin Luther King's famous barrier-breaking, "I Have a Dream" speech. This speech would help shift the way Americans think and live their lives for decades and perhaps centuries into the future. The march was a complete and total success. Following the march, Dr. King and many of the other events planners were invited into the White House as President Kennedy signed a civil rights bill that the movement had been waiting for. There is no telling where we would be as a nation without the hard work and dedication of all those people that day. Without those broken barriers, civil injustice would have continued unabated. Bayard Rustin helped Dr. King discover and commit to the power of peaceful protest in confronting the barriers of racism. Rustin's ideals, his core beliefs, and his organizational skills helped bring this powerful and brilliant movement to a barrier-breaking moment in the March on Washington. Bayard Rustin went on to a relatively simple life. He found a new cause to fight for in his ending years: gay marriage and gay rights. He would meet his partner, Walter Neagle, and spend his last 10 years by his side. Sometime before his death on August 24th, 1987, he is reported to have said that the next civil rights movement would be for gay rights. Rustin's influence as a gay man broke barriers in and of itself. He was a successful black and gay man in a world where such a combination is looked down on and altogether unheard of. Bayard Rustin's contributions to the March on Washington and his influence of all other activists broke barriers of what was possible. American history was changed forever.